welcome everyone to the very first episode of Kaiju Madness, the show where I explore the universe of giant monsters. Let's kick the series off right, starting with the granddaddy and iconic Kaiju movies. Gojira, in the West known as Godzilla King of Monsters, will make his big debut on November 3rd, 1954 in Japanese theaters. The film production company responsible for funding and producing the project was Toho Studios. They were formerly known for their battle epics and war propaganda pre-World War II. Godzilla at the time was seen as a fairly large gamble for the company, but the international success of American films such as King Kong gave Toho the confidence to carry forward with the project. The original idea for the film's monster came from producer Tomoyuki Tanaka. The monster was envisioned at first to be a cross between a whale and a giant gorilla. Gojira being the Japanese words for the two animals combined together. It's kind of a shame we never got to see this weird hybrid version of Godzilla, but likely it's for the best he changed course in his design direction. After all, I have a hard time believing some weird chimera would have been as iconic as he is today. In the end, we got something more akin to a dinosaur with his skin modeled after radiation burns. It was decided the core of the story would be a metaphor for the horror of nuclear weapons inspired by the aftermath of H-bomb testing and the bombing in Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Bomb testing to which I'm referring to happened on an island by the name of Bikini Atoll, which led to the tragic death of 23 Japanese fishermen aboard the vessel the Lucky Dragon No. 5. The very first scene of the film is a direct reference to the tragedy. The movie would become a powerful allegory against the continual development of bigger and badder weapons that present an ever-constant threat to wiping out humanity. The screenplay and direction of the film was handled by a man by the name of Ishiro Honda, and the special effects by Eiji Saburio, the Kira Ifukube behind the iconic music and roar. I'm sorry for most likely butchering all their names to pieces. I grew up the dubbed version of these films on cable TV. As a kid, I adored the giant radioactive lizard and the monsters he would face off against. While the poor dubbing can be good for a laugh, the true way to experience these classics are in the film's native language with English subtitles. We'll be examining the subtitled original version of the 1954 classic. I'll be asking and answering the question whether or not I think the film is still worth viewing in the modern era. A warning going forward, I'll be spoiling the entire film, so if you intend to experience it for yourself, I encourage you to pause the video and come back later. If you can't tell by now, this movie was shot in black and white. I can hear people groaning with complaints already, but all I have to say about it is just get over it. Black and white can go a long way in building depth of shadows that color simply, in my opinion, can't replicate. It adds to the mystique and atmosphere. And there are definitely shots in this film that prove my point. It annoys the crap out of me when people completely dismiss a film for not being in color or just being old in general. I want to go ahead and say it. The soundtrack and sound design in general are fantastic. The main theme, one of my favorite movie tracks of all time. Ifukube did an amazing job and was a master at his craft. I'll try to include a brief clip of it here and pray to the YouTube gods not to get a copyright strike. The opening credit crawl with the music and Godzilla stomps and roar was a great way to prepare the audience for what's to come. Even those not fully familiar with the film or the franchise as a whole can easily recognize this iconic theme and Godzilla's mighty roar. The film opens on a fishing vessel at sea. A bright light emanating from the depths overtakes them, sinking the ship, but they manage to send out a call for help beforehand via telegraph. This leads to a great establishing shot as it cuts to the tower receiving the signal back on shore. It's little details like this that make the film great. This is the reference to the tragic real-world event I mentioned earlier. It would spark a nationwide panic and strain diplomatic relations between Japan and the US at the time. Enough with the history lesson already. Back to the movie. In response to the distress signal, the Coast Guard sends vessels out in search of the missing ship. This ends in disaster, with several different vessels vanishing, with nearly 20 ships altogether disappearing in total, sending authorities and family of the missing men into mass panic, representing the widespread fear of radiation by the Japanese people. Only one lone survivor ends up making it, washing up ashore on a raft in a small fishing village on one of Japan's smaller islands. It's in this village from an old man we first hear the name Godzilla. From him, we learn in the past when the fish would disappear, he would hold a ceremonial ritual ending with a sacrifice of a young woman to the beast, with the ritualistic dance being all that's left over in the present time of the film, hinting at the possibility that this creature has been here in the past and their ancestors were aware of its presence. In general, this is a great setup. It takes time to build up tension and mystery, making you ask the question of what's causing the ships to vanish, even though we already know. It does an excellent job at establishing some local flavor and lore of the people of this small village. This also goes to hint at Godzilla's food source being fish, with them even commenting the catch has been non-existent lately. The lack of fish also have reference to the destruction of the local environment caused by the radiation. There's also something about an old man delivering exposition in these types of films that just works for me.
Don't bury your son's body at the Indian burial ground, Starch. The one that's right up over there, behind the Anderson's barn.
The film has some great shots of the beach and village. It serves as a fantastic snapshot into 1954 Japan. The village and island is only really relevant for the first act of the movie, yet it's full of excellent details and lore building, keeping you intrigued and engaged with it. After the ceremony, the village gets destroyed by a storm and killing several people. In reality, this is Godzilla off-screen causing the destruction, but they withhold giving us a glimpse of him just yet. It builds tension as this unseen force represents the force of a nuclear blast. This leads to an emergency conference of Japanese officials and representatives along with scientists, one of them a paleontologist by the name of Professor Yamane. It's decided he'll head up the team investigating the matter, going to the island along with his daughter Emiko and her secret boyfriend Agata. As they are leaving by ship, we also get a glimpse of a mysterious man with an eye patch. He'll be important later. Investigating the site, they discover it to be radioactive from what turns out to be massive footprints. The radiation coinciding with the location of the footprints along with a long-extinct sea creature embedded in said print. This leads you to believe that whatever it is must reside deep within the fathoms of the ocean. It's around this time you start hearing large thuds, sending everyone into a frenzy up a hill to see what it is. It's then we get our first look at Godzilla towering over a hill in all of his magnificent rubbery glory, letting rip one of his iconic roars, sending the locals fleeing in terror. He disappears, his thumbs growing more distant behind the hill. The villagers return atop the hill to find only footprints in the sand below. This introduction is great, and I love the composite or forced perspective shot with Godzilla in the hill to sell the illusion of his massive size. Concluding his research, he delivers a full report, a beast from 2 million years in the past, his native habitat and his food source destroyed by H-bomb testing. The creature, now irradiated and driven from its home, is on a rampage across all of Japan. The film does an excellent job of drawing you in and building up the mystery and tension while giving you the tools to solve said mystery, as well as taking the time to build up the mythology and lore of Godzilla. It also is interesting seeing how the Japanese Defense Force, politicians, and scientists respond to the threat. Of course, they decide the monster needs to be slain, but Professor Yamane himself, throughout most of the film, doesn't want to kill the beast, but study it, learn how it survived, and understand how it's so resistant to radiation. The Japanese Defense Force first plan is to use depth charges to try and take out Godzilla below the waves of the ocean. Of course, this fails. Do you remember Emiko? I mentioned her earlier being Yamane's daughter. While she's finally given something to do, a reporter approaches her and asks to be introduced to her fiancé, Dr. Sarazawa. Sarazawa, as far as I can remember, is never mentioned as her fiancé again, at least by the subtitles. He is a reclusive scientist that is tight-lipped about his research. Remember the mysterious man with an eye patch from before that I pointed out? The one seen off the expedition team? That was Dr. Shirazawa. There's a bit of a love triangle going on here with Agata, the secret boyfriend I mentioned earlier, Emiko, and Dr. Shirazawa, with Emiko seeing Shirazawa as an older brother type. It does that whole childhood friend trope we know and love from modern anime. It's good to see it was alive and well in 1954. Her relationship with Agata is kept secret from both Shirazawa and her father. They want to tell them, but circumstances with Godzilla hinders it being the more important matter to deal with. Frankly, I find the whole love triangle subplot of the film to be the weakest aspect of it, as well as being underdeveloped. I can't bring myself to care about it, and it causes the film's second act to drag a little because of it, not to mention Emika's acting is just over the top and more of a character of a stereotypical woman of the time. Rather than being an actual character, it seems their sole purpose in the movie is to react dramatically in a cheesy way to whatever's happening. I guess this can give you a bit of an insight to Japanese familial culture at the time, seeing Emiko at one point serving drinks to the men of the household. I don't blame the actor, to be clear, I just think it's a product of its time and a failing of the script and direction. But I guess it's interesting in its own right, seeing the differences and sensibilities of our own modern culture to 1950s Japan. Anyways, Serizawa refuses to interview with the reporter, not wanting to reveal his current project to the public, but decides to confide to Emiko about it. But it's kept off screen from us for a later dramatic reveal, instead focusing on Emiko's reaction, hinting that it's something terrifying. Making her promise not to tell anyone. Meanwhile, Godzilla's rampage continues, hitting and destroying cities. The military's attempts all fail to slow or hinder the beast, leaving his targets in a sea of flames as he breathes out a radioactive steam. I haven't mentioned it yet, but Godzilla has a very slow, deliberate way he moves, likely necessary due to the limitations of his suit. However, this lumbering style would become iconic and essential to the DNA of the series. An important part of who and what Godzilla is. The practical special effects are fantastic. The miniature set's adorable and detailed. These are my favorite aspects of these films, and the design of Godzilla is amazing. The destruction Godzilla causes takes its toll on Yamane, even him realizing that Godzilla must be stopped, initially believing Godzilla must be researched, not killed. It's in the aftermath of the destruction Emiko betrays Dr. Serizawa, telling Agata about his research. His project, a new weapon, a terrible one capable of mass destruction, one capable of stopping Godzilla or exterminating an entire nation if it ever falls into the wrong hands. They both go to confront Serizawa and attempt to convince him to let them use it. What is this weapon, you ask? The oxygen destroyer. A small amount of it able to cover a large area. It splits the oxygen atoms of whatever it comes into contact with, liquefying its flesh. This weapon terrifies Serizawa, and he's determined for it to stay a secret until he can prove it can be used for something good. Something to benefit humanity, not destroy it. He's hesitant, but ultimately to convince him to use it to stop Godzilla. He burns his notes stating this will be the one and only time this weapon will ever be used. This is a great dramatic scene, though I still find Emiko's acting to be forced and hammy. They set out to sea, tracking Godzilla with a Geiger counter. The oxygen destroyer needs to be deployed underwater. Serizawa suits up in diving equipment to do so. Agata refuses to allow Serizawa to do this alone and joins him despite the doctor's insistence on going in alone. Beneath the waves, Agata and the doctor find Godzilla slumbering. I really love these scenes, from the shots to the somber and sad music playing during it all. For a reason I can't really discern, Agata is pulled up early, leaving Serizawa alone with Godzilla. Tense moments pass as Serizawa preps the device and unleashes it with Agata trying desperately to contact him. The doctor watches as his device activates. He contacts Agata, informing him the weapon is working and wishing Emiko and Agata a happy life together, revealing they knew all along about the relationship. They start trying to reel him in, only to discover Serizawa cut his tether. Ultimately, he wasn't willing to risk his weapon ever getting used again. He understood humans are weak. Under the right coercion, he may be forced to recreate his research. So he makes the ultimate sacrifice to ensure the oxygen destroyer stays out of the hands of every nation, kept from the politicians that would make war with it. As the weapon does its job, Godzilla writhes in agony, rising to the surface one last time before sinking back into the depths of the ocean floor, where him and Dr. Serizawa together find their final resting place. While Godzilla may have been the force behind the destruction, the real antagonist is mankind itself. Our unrelenting drive for war and more deadly weapons and our recklessness to use them. The defeat of Godzilla doesn't end in celebration, but in mourning the loss of Dr. Serizawa and the innocent lives. Godzilla's death itself is treated more as a tragedy rather than a victory. The movie closes with a final message from the professor.
あのゴジラが最後の一匹だとは思えない。もし水爆実験が続けて行われるとしたら、あのゴジラの同類がまた世界のどこかへ現れてくるかもしれない。
He struggles to believe Godzilla is the last of his kind, and if we continue nuke testing, we'll awaken another Godzilla deep from within the fathoms of the ocean. If you were to ask me if this film still holds up today, I'd be inclined to emphatically say yes. Its cinematography, its set designs, its excellent practical effects and miniatures, its iconic soundtrack and effects, the attention to detail painting a clear snapshot into 1954 Japan's culture and of course Godzilla himself. The plot and its anti-war messaging that I still believe to be relevant today, it all blends together to create a masterwork of cinematic history. It played an important role in Japan's early developing film industry and became an international success for Toho. While later installments of the franchise would move away from its anti-war roots and more into comedic and action-oriented plots, I believe it's important to remember the foundation and the start of the Godzilla franchise and the messaging it intended. Most people think of it as that silly dinosaur film with a man in a rubber suit awkwardly swatting at planes or battling King Kong. The bombing of Nagasaki and Hiroshima, along with the incident involving the fishing vessel the Lucky Dragon No. 5 and nuclear fallout, left its mark on Japan's culture and history. Knowing the history of the film makes the scenes depicting Godzilla's destruction and the aftermath of the violence all the more impactful. I 100% recommend this film. There's a lot of fun to be found here. There's a lot of artistry in the physical sets and props and practical effects CGI simply lacks. I can't say enough about how much I love a good miniature and seeing them destroyed. Please consider checking it out. The Japanese audio edit and subtitle version is the only way to go when experiencing this classic and how it was intended. Wow, this video ended up being far longer than I originally intended it to be. I'll probably try to be more concise in my next episode and try to reduce the runtime. I'm sorry. If you made it this far, thank you, man. I really appreciate it. This is only the first step in a long journey to covering every Godzilla film ever, as well as many other franchises in Kaiju madness. And sincerely hope you'll join me on this magical journey and quest. Consider subscribing, liking this video, and turning on notifications to receive updates on new content. Farewell, everyone.